So I think women in general, just like men, need to educate themselves. They need to understand what these signs and symptoms are. They need to understand what's happening to their body. And an open communication with your partner is really vital. And I think menopause puts a different spin on a relationship because you have to be able to have hard conversations. You have to be able to say things that are uncomfortable. It's hard as a woman to admit some of the things that are occurring with my own body. Better less tell them to my husband.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a great author on the show. And we're going to talk about her journey as an author. Lots of great things that have happened for her. And get a little bit behind the scenes of what she's writing. Peach Grayson is on the podcast. Peach, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
This is great, Peach. You mentioned there's a squirrel competing for your attention and time with me as we record. It's hard to compete with a squirrel, but where are you in this big world of ours?
Well, at the moment, I'm sitting in Montana in a little bitty cabin on the river.
Oh, come on. That sounds like the perfect place to be right now. That sounds great.
Compared to the rest of the country, I think it's a great place. Yeah, it's nice and cool. We had snow 2 days ago, but...
Snow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And all the squirrels are friendly is what are you telling me? They're good?
They're overly friendly. They come up onto the porch, and if you don't feed them peanuts, then they gritch and bark at you and throw a hissy fit, and they've chewed a hole through the screen and they just keep coming on. And it's like, she comes right up to the door, looks through the window, and it's like, I don't have peanuts. Go away.
Do they have like little signs that they're holding, like feed us or anything like that?
No. We did have a little pet squirrel, though. Well, I shouldn't say pet, but he was a little ground squirrel, and you could open the door and he would literally run in the house, run up on the couch, sit on your lap. He was the friendliest squirrel I'd ever met.
Wow. Amazing. Well, everyone, welcome to the Squirrel Podcast, all things squirrel, because, hey, I love it. But we're not here to talk about squirrels as much as we love them. We're here to talk about your journey as an author. So, Peach, tell us how all this started for you. There was a point in life when being an author wasn't really in the cards, and now here you are. So something's happened. I'd like to unpack that a little bit. What was the initial spark for you to say, you know what, I'm going to jump on this path of being an author? What was it that got your attention?
Originally, I worked in the healthcare industry, and I'm a typical middle-aged woman. And over the course of several years, noticed that I obviously was going through menopause. Went and searched for information online, books, just whatever I could find out there. And everything was very medical related. It was a 600-page book with lots of jargon and just not anything that I really wanted to read. I wanted to know just the facts about what the heck menopause was and what I was experiencing, and was this normal? Is this what everybody else goes through? And I just couldn't honestly find the information in a very enjoyable, readable format. And so I decided, well, if it's not out there, then by golly, I'm going to do it myself.
And your book's not meant to be a textbook.
No.
It's meant to be a different form of helping us understand menopause. What's your intent for the book? What did you not want to write? And what did you write?
So I didn't want to write some kind of medical journal. That wasn't my interest. I wanted to write something that would appeal to every woman and man out there on just the basic facts about menopause, what women go through, what they experience, and in an easy, understandable format. And the book really took on kind of a life of its own, and there's a lot of humor in it. So it's an enjoyable read. You can sit down and read it. You're going to laugh and you're going to learn without even realizing you're learning about true signs and symptoms and potential treatments that are out there. So the learning is in the background, and the humor and the enjoyment is what you feel like you're actually reading.
I love it. I've already ordered a book for my wife.
Yay.
She is in this part of her life, and she doesn't mind me talking about that. She's really kind of struggling through all this, and I guess the one thing that she's really, having a hard time with is just the hot flashes and all this stuff. She's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And she just gets really flushed, and then all of a sudden she's like it wasn't even happening. And then there it is again. Like she's counting them, and she's at the beginning, she was a little nervous that they were happening too often. So, but she's been tracking that and kind of keep track every day about how many and how often. But there's so much that she doesn't know. So your book's going to be a great accompaniment for her. Again, she's not looking for a textbook. Yeah. So your book is exactly what she's looking for. So for the listener who is at this stage of their life or knows somebody at this stage of their life, I'm talking to the husbands here, why would this be the best book from your perspective for somebody at this stage? What are you really hoping they're going to walk away with?
I think the goal is that it breaks it down in very bite-sized pieces, and it's easy to understand, and it's logical. It's not some medical jargon that a lot of people might not understand. It doesn't have a lot of scientific, of the hypothalamus and how it affects the brain and how that affects your temperature. And it doesn't go through all of that. It really is just the nuts and bolts. Everybody gets hot flashes, and some people get them once a day. Some people get them once a month. Some of them are cursed with 4, 5, 8 times in a day. And it's all normal. And it changes every single day. One day you may have one hot flash. The next day you may have 10. And I think ultimately I want the readers and the world to know that it's normal. And it happens to all of us. If we live long enough, we're going to go through menopause. There is no escaping it. And just knowing that this is what happens to every woman, and every woman's journey is a little unique. But if you have them once a day, once a month, or 10 times a day, unfortunately, all of that is 100% normal. And just learning that what you're feeling as a woman, or what you're seeing as a spouse or a loved one, watching their partner go through this, then it just gives you that basic understanding that, okay, you're not crazy. Because sometimes I think we all think maybe we're a little crazy. I sat last night watching TV and had kind of a hot flush, but only on half of my body. So the right side of my ear turned beet red. The right side of my face turned beet red. I could feel my heartbeat just in the right side of my ear. And so I get up, I look in the mirror, and I'm like, I look honestly ridiculous. And my husband's got a flashlight, and he's shining it on both sides of my ear. And he's like, wow, that's crazy. And it's just one of those things. And it's like, you know what? 10 minutes later, it's gone, like it never happened. And of course, you just feel like you're just not sure. Is this normal? Am I really odd? But then when you read the book, you start to realize that everybody has these odd, bizarre things. And sometimes I think there's so many unusual things that occur for women during the course of menopause over years that I think it's just good to know that we're not alone, that we're all kind of going through this together, all in different phases, but we all go through it.
Does your book kind of cover off some of the myths around menopause? Like, is there some things in there that kind of go, this seems to be a popular thing people think about, but that's really not what's happening? Do you cover any of that at all?
So this book is the first of 3 in a series. And so the second book is slightly different. It's called Let's Talk Menopause, Fact versus Fiction. So it's very straightforward. It doesn't have the sarcasm that's so me in the first book. It's more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing. And it 100% goes through fact and fiction. What is the myth, and debunking those particular myths. And it takes a very holistic approach to menopause on what the signs and symptoms are. And so it's really geared towards that reader who maybe doesn't want the comic of, the crazy adventures that we go through and the terrible things that happen that embarrass us. So it's more of just a fact and a fiction. So that book absolutely goes through myths and debunking those myths so that the reader can really understand what's true and what's not. Because sometimes we hear all kinds of things. And unfortunately, the science itself changes on a regular basis. So it kind of just follows that path on, today, what we know and how that affects women.
Okay. And then the age range you brought up when we were chatting before, we kind of think of maybe a specific age range for people that are going through menopause. But when we were talking and what my research preparing for today, the age range is quite wide and broad for women going through menopause. Can you talk a little bit about the age range that people fall into?
So ideally, I think the age would be 30 to 80. It encompasses almost all adult women and even women younger than 30. It's a good book to kind of give you an idea of what to prepare for. So I think you could take any adult woman or adult man because it's the same thing. You have a loved one that is going through any phase, then you can kind of see and relate and get a better understanding. I think this was probably complete foreign language for my husband. And bless his heart, he's had to learn a whole lot about menopause. Probably not anything he ever wanted to really know. But, when you're married to someone or you have a family member or a loved one, then you can see that in every aspect. And even when you're 70 and 75 and 80 years old, in the end, it never really goes away. Once you're technically postmenopausal, where you've made the hurdle and you're technically over the menopausal phase, you're postmenopausal forever until the day that you die. And so those decrease in hormones, the effects don't go away. The hot flashes kind of stabilize, but you'll hear women in their 70s and in their 80s say they still have hot flashes because we still don't have estrogen. It doesn't magically come back. And so the symptoms luckily smooth out and they're not so highs and lows. They're much more easier to deal with, but they never really go away.
You gave me a great example of something that I would have never put two and two together. And you were talking about just like being out with your husband, giving directions, and you were trying to direct him in a certain way, and the words just escaped you in the moment. And it seemed comical in the moment because he was able to, you both were able to laugh about it, and it's kind of become a little thing between the two of you. But I wouldn't even have put that together, that was part of this whole process of menopause. Can you talk a little bit about that story? Because I found that to be quite interesting, and it helped me rethink how I treat my wife, Jen.
So I think brain fog, you'll hear people refer to it as brain fog, cognitive issues, memory issues. They're all part of the menopausal journey that we go through. So for me, we were driving. I was trying to give him directions, trying to explain to him to exit the road, and he was going to take the bridge across the interstate so that we would be going left. But when I'm telling him, I kept saying, exit and go left, go over, go left, exit. And he's looking at me like, what is wrong? And I'm like, I take the over road. And he's like, the over road? And I said, yeah, and I've got my hands going, making an arch. I'm like, take the over road. And he looks at me and he says, the bridge? And I was like, yes, that's the word. That's it. But for the life of me, in that moment, I could not think of the word bridge. It's such a simple word, but it completely escaped me. And unfortunately, I find that happens more frequently than I care to admit, where I'm thinking of something and it's such a simple word and it's right on the tip of your tongue, but it just doesn't come out. And then we get very creative in how we express something. You find some synonym for the word that you can't remember, and brain fog and memory issues really are a struggle for a lot of women. When you go through menopause and you're working, and you will start to realize that it can affect your work. And that's a scary thought, because the last thing we want to do is really screw up in our work. And, when it's with my husband, I can laugh and we can joke about it years later that, we're going to take an over road. But when you're working and you can't think straight, or you have memory issues, or you have brain fog, anything that affects your cognitive abilities, it's really scary. I mean, the last thing we want to do is lose our jobs because somebody doesn't think we're competent.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a really good point. What other things can we as husbands and partners, what can we do to be more sympathetic, more helpful in the moment, to be that good, solid, caring person in the relationship? What other things can we do to be more aware and helpful?
I think for men, the best thing I would suggest is learning the information so that you can recognize what's happening. Because when we don't know something, then we think that our partners just aren't, sleeping well, or they had too much caffeine, or whatever it might be. Learning the information so that you truly recognize the signs helps tremendously. And I've asked my husband, because the third book in this series is really geared towards men in helping them understand what's happening to the women and how to cope with it. And I said, so what advice would you give to men that have a wife or a loved one or someone going through this? And his response was, say nothing. When you think you want to say something, don't. Just shut up, say nothing. And it's probably pretty good advice, because I know in our relationship, he always wants to fix it. Men tend to want to fix anything that goes wrong. And this isn't something that you can fix. And so just being able to vent and express my frustrations without him trying to interfere and find a way to fix it, because there isn't a fix. Well, I mean, there's treatments, but theoretically there's no real fix. But I think really learning and educating yourself to get a good idea of what women are going through, it helps to empathize if you understand.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we all need to do better with. Is there, from a female point of view, what else is going on mentally through the early stages of menopause? Like, is there a brain thing happening as far as maybe a signal if there's a change of life happening and that we're hanging on to our youth and we're like, wait a minute, this is too early. I'm in my 30s. Like, I thought this would be my 50s, 60s, like later on, but it's happening so early. Like, is there something happening behind the scenes for the amazing women in our life that are like, feels like it's too young for this?
Well, unfortunately, the changes, it takes 10, 20 years total from beginning to end. And you'll find women in their 30s that are starting to have perimenopausal symptoms, but I think a lot of times they don't realize it because, like you said, they all think, oh no, I'm too young. Menopause is another decade away. But unfortunately, it's not. As the body changes, the estrogen and the progesterone, those hormones start to decrease, but they kind of go up and down, up and down. And so when they're down, then you'll notice mental changes like anger and rage and irritability and sleeplessness. And then the harder we have sleeping, then the more cranky we are during the day because we don't sleep. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. But I think a lot of women don't realize what they're going through in the midst of it. A lot of times we look back and go, oh, maybe that really was perimenopause. It's not a switch where one day we flip a switch and go, oh, today I'm in menopause and yesterday I wasn't. And so it's hard to recognize those signs. We all work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Most people have, kids and baseball and all these different activities. And so we chalk it up to everything life related. The kids are busy. I'm working far longer and gone back. You realize that maybe it was more than just, your general everyday life.
Okay. So from the woman's point of view, then, understanding that the change is happening for them, how can they communicate better to their partner so that we as husbands can do our part in return? How can they help us to understand what's happening? The book's going to be a great resource. Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about. But that conversation happening, when the women in our life realize this is going on and this is where they're at, what kind of things do they need to say to their partners to help the partners understand better?
So I think women in general, just like men, need to educate themselves. They need to understand what these signs and symptoms are. They need to understand what's happening to their body. And an open communication with your partner is really vital. And I think menopause puts a different spin on a relationship because you have to be able to have hard conversations. You have to be able to say things that are uncomfortable. It's hard as a woman to admit some of the things that are occurring with my own body, better or less tell them to my husband. It was a very difficult conversation to have with him when I sat down on the couch and I said, okay, I never, ever, ever thought I would have to say this, but if you see black wiry hairs in my chin, you have to tell me because I don't recognize that. I don't see that. But as menopause comes on, I got these little wiry hairs come out of my chin like whiskers. It was embarrassing. And it's hard to have that conversation with myself. And then I had to have it with my husband. I want my husband to think, that I'm beautiful and that I'm sexy. And here I'm having a conversation with him about chin hairs. So, there's a little humility in all of this, but you have to be able to have those conversations because as menopause goes on, those conversations get even harder because worse things happen to your body. And you have to be able to say to your husband these things. We had a conversation last night and it's hard, but it's what you have to do.
And again, that's why your book exists, to fill the gap where all these textbooks left you kind of like, well, that's very clinical. Thanks for all the big fancy words, but now that I have all this homework to look up these words mean, I really haven't walked away with something I can put into practice today. And that's where your book slides in there. That's much better of an experience, especially for someone who's maybe doesn't have the training that you have and the knowledge that you have. We're at a disadvantage because we don't know any of these words and terms and symptoms, and we're like completely lost here.
Yeah.
And I think your book's going to be that helpful gap filler there to kind of help us through that transition. And I love the fact that you have multiple books in plan for this. So I can tell that that one book wasn't sufficient to cover the breadth of the material, that you have multiple books coming. What are the timelines on the other books? Can you give us an advance to that as well?
So the second book is going to be The Fact versus Fiction, and that one should be available on Amazon in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Good. And then the final book will be Let's Talk Menopause, Understanding Her BSC Level. That's the one geared towards men. It's a rather truly hilarious book. I chuckle every time I read it. It just excites me. And that one will probably be available in about 6 weeks.
Okay. Wow. It's just a short timeline for all of these. This is great.
Yeah, one book kind of morphed into the next, because I want to be able to reach all of the readers. Like I said, I have a very sarcastic tone to me. That's just who I am as a person. But I recognize that not everybody is that way. And so maybe they don't want the humor in the comics. Maybe they just want the information so that they can then make an educated decision for themselves. So I wanted to be able to reach all of the readers, young, old, those that like humor, those that don't, the men that probably don't want to know anything about menopause, but then on the other side probably realize, maybe I need to learn a little bit because my wife or my girlfriend or whoever, appears to be struggling with some things. So the goal is to really reach out to all of the readers out there.
Mm-hmm. It's good. And well, it's right there in the name, Menopause. Men, you need to pay attention. So it's right there. Don't ignore that. So have you heard any feedback from readers? Have you got any feedback on the content or the style of your writing? Anything come back to you that maybe was encouraging, or maybe like, wow, I didn't realize that somebody would take it that way or be inspired in that way? What's the feedback been like on the books?
Feedback has been very positive. Excuse me. I think the surprising one for me was the older readers that I got, reviews from some of my beta readers and ARC readers telling me, I wish I had had this 10 years ago. And that just kind of solidified the fact that these books need to be out. Everybody needs these, because I camp with a group of women, and some of them are older, some of them are in their 70s. And most of the women that pre-read for me all said, oh, if I'd only had this 10 years ago. So I think that was really inspiring, because it made me realize that, you know what, I am on the right path. Because you don't know, I can think for myself, this is a book that the world needs, but I don't really know until I put it out there. And when you get feedback from people, that are reading it going, oh, I so related, I so understood, or another, reader telling me, this is great information. I don't think I've started menopause, but now I'm a little afraid, but at least I know what to look for. So there's been positive feedback from all age ranges, but I think the ones from the older ladies, wishing that they had had something like that, really solidified my thought process that it really is needed. It's information, and it's brought in a format that is enjoyable.
maybe for the women that are listening, this book is also going to be helpful for them if maybe surgically menopause was brought on earlier than expected through surgery. So now they're facing this. They've had to go through surgery, but now they're faced with menopause, and they're maybe younger than 30. And that's another whole group of women that I think maybe are struggling a little bit with having to go through this and thinking they had maybe a longer, again, extended time without having to think about menopause. Surgery could be that one thing that turns this completely around on them, and they're not prepared at all. So
No.
your book's going to be helpful, right?
It will be very helpful. And it's really hard when you've had a hysterectomy, and if they take the ovaries, that's when you basically are thrown into menopause instantly, the very day.
Yeah.
And so it's really a challenge because they didn't have the mental ability to prepare for it. And then surgically, just one day, they are truly in menopause. It is a switch for them. And unfortunately, when you have women who've had hysterectomy and you've left the ovaries, then they tend to go into menopause earlier than if they had gone into menopause naturally, even though the ovaries were still there. And so it's a whole different ball game for them. Sometimes their symptoms are more severe. And it's interesting because the idea is the ovaries were still there. They were supposed to go into menopause naturally. But that's not really what we see in the field. These women end up going into menopause early, and then they have a much harder time with it.
Peach, I want to put this into your lap here. I want you to talk to the audience as they're here listening. Obviously, we're all going to go out and buy the book. Again, mine's on its way for my wife, Jen. But for those listeners that are here because of the title of the podcast, because of the title of your book, and they're here to learn more. What else are we not talking about here today that could really help someone in menopause right now? And again, looking for those resources like your book out there in the world. What's your message to them? How can we help them? What are we not talked about that you really think we should?
I think for all of the women, whether you're 20 or 80, I think it's important to understand what menopause is, because it is a very big part of life. And I do think that finding the information that's available, whether it's in this book or other literature, having conversations with physicians, I do think that there's a lot of different treatment options. And unfortunately, each doctor is different, and you can't expect to go to one doctor and get the same options from every doctor. And unfortunately, some doctors really aren't even interested in providing symptom relief. And that's frustrating. And I think for us women, we need to make sure that we have conversations with our doctors. And if we don't get the answers we want, that we realize we've got to go somewhere else. And it happens more often than I care to admit that we do have to go somewhere else. You might have been with your general practitioner for the last 25 years, but if he or she isn't interested in helping you through this journey, then it's time to find a new physician. And some physicians are very keen on menopausal treatments, on hormone replacement therapy, on homeopathic treatments, and others just aren't. And it's hard to admit that maybe our doctor doesn't treat us as an individual as well as they possibly could. And it is hard to leave and go to another doctor, but I think we really we have to advocate for ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it.
Right. What are a couple of good questions to ask a doctor to kind of help us determine if this doctor is the best for us through our menopause journey?
I think asking your physician what treatment options they typically prescribe. The problem with hormones are they change every single day. So if you go into your doctor at 8:00 on a Monday morning and you have your hormone levels checked, they might be X. If you go in 3 days later at 3:00 in the afternoon, they might be Y. And that doesn't mean that you are or you aren't in menopause. It just means at that one particular moment, the hormone levels are what they are. And sometimes physicians only treat that number. They'll say, well, you're not in menopause yet. But the bottom line is, if you're symptomatic, then you have a right to some kind of treatment to help with those symptoms. There isn't anything that's going to stop your menopause. Although there is a hormone replacement therapy that some women will take And sometimes they will actually go back onto a birth control pill and take hormones in that manner. Um, but when you're talking to your doctor, finding out what they typically prescribe or are willing to prescribe, and making sure that that physician is comfortable with whatever treatment you like. There's a lot of controversy on the HRT, the hormone replacement therapy, and you'll have physicians that will not prescribe it. And maybe it's contraindicated for some patients, but it isn't for all patients. So you really need to make sure that your physician is willing to prescribe whatever works for you. And you have to be able to try some different things, because whatever you get the first time might not work. And you want to make sure that the physician is willing to continue trying different avenues. Sometimes it's a vitamin deficiency. Sometimes it's just an iron deficiency. Maybe it's magnesium. A lot of postmenopausal women really benefit from a magnesium supplement. Sometimes it's as simple as that. So I think when you have those conversations with your physician, making sure that they're open to all kinds of therapies, whether it be drug related or homeopathic or, lifestyle changes, different things like that. If you have trouble sleeping, your physician should be willing to help you with a sleep aid if that's necessary. But again, some of them aren't. And it's frustrating because if you go in and you have a physician that says, oh, well, you're not in menopause yet, so there's really nothing I can do for you, then you leave feeling helpless. Like, okay, I'm just going to suffer every day. A lot of women will benefit from antidepressant, because depression and mood changes are a very significant part of menopause. And it's a temporary thing. It's not like you need to go on an antidepressant for the rest of your life, but some women really benefit from that antidepressant. And you'll get some physicians that just aren't willing to try that. And so I think when you talk to the physician, you really just have to make sure that they're willing to try whatever is necessary to make you live the best life that you can possibly live.
And again, I love the fact that you have 3 different approaches to this topic, and you really focus in on 3 different areas so that all 3 books together give you a really well-rounded picture of how all of us can kind of be there for each other through this menopause journey. And I'm so happy that you have this out in the world, Peach. As far as connecting with you, I'm sure there's going to be questions. Maybe somebody's looking for a guest speaker to come on, like a Zoom thing with a bunch of women that have questions, and be a speaker and an advocate and promote your book. But maybe there's someone looking for someone like you to come and speak to their group virtually or in person. How do people reach out to you, and like, where do we find the books, all that information? Because I want to put that in the notes so people can connect with you. Where do we go from here, Peach, to be in your world?
So the books themselves are on Amazon, and it's Amazon has a wide distribution. So even if you were to Google it, you can find it in other platforms like Barnes and Noble, a couple other things. But they're all processed through Amazon. And there's an ebook and both a paperback. You can email me. My email is in the back of the book, and it's the email is Peach the writer with 2 T's at gmail.com.
Okay.
Funny little story, but for another day. And then Author Central through Amazon, there's an Author Central where you can follow. And if you just Google Peach Grayson, I should come up.
Yeah.
And you can see all of the books there. You can kind of see a little bit about my bio. And then last place will be my website, peachgrayson.com.
That's so easy. There you go. And that's a very unique website, and I love your name, and I love that you have that availability for us. As we go, Peach, is there anything else you wanted to say to the audience that have bought your book, they're ready to press, add to cart? Anything else you want to say to them before they make that purchase?
I think I want to tell all of you how much I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this podcast, to listen to what I have to say. Hopefully you are buying the book or consider buying the book. And it gives you the opportunity to really educate yourself with what's happening, what's coming, what has already happened. And in the end, I hope it just gives you a good laugh and a better understanding.
And hopefully we're building an overroad between the listeners and you as an author. And that overroad will respond with many people buying the book and supporting you. And I love your story. It makes me smile. And I'm really looking forward with great anticipation for this book to be in our home. And Jen's looking forward to reading through it. So thank you for writing this book and the other two. Peach, thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. It's needed. You know it's needed, and you've met the need. So thank you for doing this.
Well, I appreciate the time very much. I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. Everyone, all the information, as always, is in the show notes. Go through, click through, and buy the book. And you know there's people in your life that would love to have a copy of this book. Please buy a copy for them as well. So buy more than one. And let's share it with people in our lives, because we want people to have a good laugh, but we also want them to have the knowledge and be able to have great conversations at home with their partners on what they need and how we can show up for each other. And these books are going to be there, all three, to help you in that journey. Peach, thank you again so much for doing this.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.